In the summer of 1987, deep in the rocky passes of eastern Afghanistan, a young mujahideen fighter crouched behind a boulder, his hands trembling, not from fear, but from excitement. In his arms, a weapon unlike anything his people had ever held. Sleek, compact, deadly. An American-made FIM-92 Stinger missile launcher. Just weeks earlier, he'd been fighting Soviet Mi-24 Hind helicopters with rusty rifles and prayers. Now, he had the power to bring down a flying fortress from the sky. He didn't know it yet, but the weapon in his hands would change the course of not one, but two wars. And decades later, those same helicopters, American ones, would fall from the Afghan sky, shot down by men trained with U.S. money, U.S. tactics, and U.S. weapons. This is the story of how America's secret war in Afghanistan didn't end in 1989. It just went underground and came back to haunt us. It all began long before 9/11, long before the Twin Towers fell. Back in 1979, when the Soviet Union rolled its tanks into Kabul, the United States saw an opportunity. The Cold War was raging, and Afghanistan, a rugged, tribal nation with no oil, no industry, just mountains and pride, suddenly became the front line in a global chess match. The CIA launched Operation Cyclone, the largest covert operation in its history. Billions of dollars, tens of thousands of rifles, millions of rounds of ammunition, and one goal: bleed the Red Army dry. But the CIA didn't go in alone. They needed local fighters, fierce, motivated, willing to die. They found them in the mujahideen, Islamic guerrillas from every corner of Afghanistan. Some were patriots, some were warlords, some were radicals with dreams far beyond national borders. To Washington, it didn't matter. As long as they hated Moscow, they were allies. The famous quote, often misattributed but hauntingly accurate, says it all. "The enemy of my enemy is my friend." And so the US began funneling weapons through Pakistan's intelligence agency, the ISI. AK-47s, rocket-propelled grenades, landmines. And then, in 1986, something game-changing, the Stinger missile. Suddenly, the Soviet helicopter, the symbol of Soviet air dominance, was vulnerable. In 1986 alone, Soviet aircraft losses in Afghanistan doubled. By 1987, pilots refused to fly below 10,000 feet. The mujahideen, once hunted like animals, now held the sky in their hands. And Washington celebrated. The Red Army was retreating. The Cold War was turning. America had won. But no one asked, what happens to these weapons when the war ends? No one asked, who exactly are we arming? Because among those mujahideen fighters were men like Gulbuddin Hekmatyar, a ruthless warlord who bombed hospitals and once threw acid in the faces of women he deemed immodest. Or Jalaluddin Haqqani, whose network would later evolve into the Haqqani network, one of America's deadliest enemies in the 2000s. And yes, somewhere in the mix, though not directly funded by the CIA, was a young Saudi named Osama bin Laden, building training camps and dreaming of a global jihad, with tacit US tolerance because he too fought the Soviets. When the Soviets finally withdrew in 1989, America walked away. The funding stopped, the promises vanished, Afghanistan collapsed into civil war, and those stingers, those rifles, those tactics, they didn't disappear, they evolved. Fast forward to October 7, 2001, the US launches Operation Enduring Freedom. American helicopters roar over the same mountains where mujahideen once fired stingers at Soviet aircraft. Only this time, the enemy isn't Moscow. It's the Taliban, many of whom were trained, armed, and radicalized during that very same CIA-backed war. And guess what they're using to fight back? In 2002, a Chinook helicopter is hit by a rocket-propelled grenade in southeastern Afghanistan. 2 soldiers die. In 2005, during Operation Red Wings, Navy SEALs call for extraction, and the rescue Chinook is shot down by Taliban fighters using Soviet-era weapons, but fired with American-trained precision. All 16 aboard are killed. In 2011, a Chinook is shot down in Wardak province. 30 Americans die, the deadliest single loss of US lives in the entire Afghan war. The Taliban claims responsibility.
And in their propaganda video, you can see it. The fighters wearing US-made boots, using radios once issued to Afghan allies, moving with the discipline of soldiers who learned guerrilla warfare from the very nation they're now killing.
We trained them. We armed them. Then they shot down our helicopters. It's a bitter irony that history rarely forgives. The US didn't just create a resistance, it created a template for asymmetric warfare that would be turned against it. The same mountain trails used to smuggle Stingers in 1987 were used to smuggle IEDs in 2007. The same caves that sheltered mujahideen from Soviet bombs later housed al-Qaeda commanders plotting attacks on New York and Paris. Even the tactics were recycled. The US taught mujahideen how to set ambushes, how to use terrain, how to blend in with civilians. 2 decades later, Taliban fighters used those exact lessons against American convoys. And the weapons? The weapons came full circle. Declassified reports confirmed that after 2001, US forces regularly recovered Stinger missiles, American-made, serial-numbered, shipped in the 1980s, in Taliban hideouts. Some were too old to fire, but their presence sent a chilling message. You gave us the tools, now we're using them against you. Perhaps the most haunting twist? The Taliban never developed their own air force. They didn't need to, because the US had already given them the perfect weapon: chaos, distrust, a failed state, a generation of fighters who grew up believing America was just the latest empire to bleed in these mountains, and would eventually leave, just like the Soviets did.
And they were right. In August 2021, as the last US helicopters lifted off from the roof of the embassy in Kabul, Afghans clung to the landing skids, desperate to escape. Below, Taliban fighters walked through the abandoned US military bases, picking up M4 rifles, night vision goggles, Humvees, even drone controllers. All paid for by American taxpayers, all now in enemy hands. One Taliban commander, standing in a hangar once used by US Special Forces, told a reporter, "We fought them for 20 years. Now their weapons are ours." The circle was complete. So who's to blame? Not the soldiers on the ground, they followed orders. Not the CIA officers in 1987, they were fighting a global superpower with every tool available. But somewhere along the way, a fatal mistake was made, confusing short-term victory for long-term strategy. America saw Afghanistan as a battlefield. But Afghanistan is not a battlefield, it's a graveyard of empires, and every foreign power that tried to reshape it, from Alexander the Great to the British, the Soviets, and finally the Americans, learned the same lesson too late. You can win battles here, but you cannot win the war, unless you understand the people, the history, the soul of the land. We didn't. We dropped weapons into a complex tribal society and expected them to be used only against our enemy. But weapons don't have loyalty. Tactics don't have borders. And once you teach someone how to kill your kind of soldier, they never forget. Today, the Stingers are mostly gone, deactivated, rusted, or sold on black markets. But their legacy lives on. In every ambush, in every downed helicopter, in every veteran who returns home asking, "Was it worth it?" Because the truth is this: America didn't just lose the war in Afghanistan, it lost it to the very forces it once called freedom fighters. And the helicopters keep falling. But this time, they're ours.